Jordan, how you doing?
I'm doing amazing. It is a rare occasion where I get actually dressed up for something. So this is a real treat for
Fan,
me as my
fan.
camera totally fucks up
It's okay.
and we switch to the shittier one.
Oftentimes an audio show, but that looks good too. That's great.
There we
Okay.
go. Lovely jacket. Lovely jacket.
Great to have you on the show. Can you give
I
us a
wore
little
this
bit
for
of
my
like
wedding. It's
yeah,
my
go.
only look.
Nice, nice. Can you give us a little high level on ChinaTalk, what you're building? Just introduce yourself to the fans.
Well, yeah, hello everyone out there. I guess I just first want to start off by saying, I grew up listening to sports radio, and to have like a call-in show be revived on a vertical that I now spend way too much time of my life thinking about, I just think is great. So like I'm rooting
Fantastic.
for you guys. I think
Thank
it's,
you.
I think
Thank
I
you.
think you're on to something.
We appreciate it.
What is China Talk? It is a podcast and newsletter about US, China, and technology that I've been running for the past 8 years now.
Wow.
And John did a really good introduction. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Like, I'm not really trying to like break news or report on news. It is just the best tagline I've given for myself is Dwarkesh for the deep state.
I love it.
Just like the stuff that politicians and intelligence officials listen to on their drive to and from work,
Yep.
where I mean, I guess now we're bringing cell phones into skiffs and texting about
Yes.
targeting information. So maybe my window is gone.
You need to get added to the chats.
Yeah, they should have added you. It would have been great.
I
Next
can
time.
neither confirm nor deny that
Okay.
I told the missile to be
Yeah.
500 meters to the right and be released right after the goat ended up
no.
doing its feeding
Well,
or whatnot. But
I mean, speaking of the signal chat thing, what is your take on that, and what has there been a reaction in China or amongst your sources and friends and people you text with?
it's just fucking embarrassing, man. It's amateur hour. This is the D team, and I think this is like the best. Like, everyone knows that these are not all the sharpest tools in the shed.
Okay.
And I think there are different levels of competency that you see across the cabinet level of this administration. And the problem is like, when you look at the discourse of actually the quotes and the arguments that they were going back and forth to each other, like, honestly, I feel like my high school Model UN team might have been able to do a better job weighing the pros and cons and timing of this sort of stuff. So that's
rough.
really what, beyond the sort of like obvious like illegality and of like texting about classified information, I was just kind of bummed that like, you grow up being like, oh man, maybe one day I'll be a national security advisor, and then it's like, oh wait, like I actually did a better job of this when I was 17.
I mean, this is what Trey Stevens always says. There's, you expect that there is a Q from the James Bond universe with secret gadgets and an all-knowing eye and a man in the chair and secret agents running around the globe. But in fact, there is no Q. You have to build it yourself.
I got a book recommendation for you,
please.
John. So
Yeah.
there's this book called The Wizard War by R.F. Jones, who was 28 years old and a PhD physicist out of Oxford when in 1939 World War II breaks out, and he is like the only scientist in the entire British intelligence community. And basically he was a complete bull in a china shop, telling everyone they were full of shit. And ultimately he got into a meeting with Churchill, and there are some 50-year-old people who are saying X, and he's like, no, it is Y, and here are the 20 reasons why it's Y. And then because he impresses the big dog, he ends up really getting to have a big impact doing all this cool stuff around radar and targeting systems and whatnot. And it goes to show that like, yes, Trey Stevens is right in that at one level there's no there, but it also means that like really excellent people at a certain point in history, when they get the right level of top cover, can like really punch above their weight. And what is concerning, I guess, about watching the past few months of this administration is like that bench of extraordinary, like it's great if you have the extraordinary cabinet secretary, which I don't think there are any, but like one level down and two levels down, like you want at least the cabinet secretary to be able to note the sort of mid-level person who's really great and give them room to run. And I'm worried that's not the timeline we're living in. But anyways, we can talk about tech too. I don't know
let's
how
talk
deep you wanna
about
get into this.
We never talk about politics on this show ever. No politics. Okay. So let's move on to tech and geopolitics. Let's talk about China.
You can talk about whatever you want. Yeah, just maybe I'd like to go a little bit back in time and talk about what drew you to be interested in China in the beginning. I studied Mandarin in college. I decided instead of going to study abroad in Barcelona and just party or whatever a lot of people do in college, I decided to go to Shanghai. And I was working out of a Chinese startup accelerator that was bringing sort of Western startups in, which is the most flawed idea.
One?
China Accelerator in Shanghai.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's like it's one of the it's like the
so
most
Jordy has a ton of experience with China, and I had a layover in China once. I was there for 12 hours in Guangzhou. So you're talking to experts, and don't dumb it down for us. But some of the listeners might be less familiar. So why don't you take us through how you got into China?
I'll give you some. I had this idea as a kid, but, a lot of kids wanted to be astronauts and things like that. I wanted to be an international businessman. I had this sort of extreme vision of myself with a briefcase, traveling to Asia to do deals. Like that was like foundational memory. And then I went to China and I realized, one, I was really frustrated that nobody really wanted to speak Mandarin in Shanghai because they speak Shanghainese, which is like a completely different dialect. Yeah. And so I was like, what am I even doing here? And then I very quickly, I feel like I clashed with the culture. I had, friends that were, local Chinese, but overall from a business culture standpoint, it just didn't work. I felt like the entire model of the accelerator that I was working out of was flawed because they were trying to bring Western companies in to build in China, and we were just constantly getting blocked on everything. It was like clearly China didn't want us to thrive there, and we've seen this with other big companies. So anyways, I got a sort of bad taste in my mouth, left, decided never to come back, stopped studying Mandarin. But I'm still very fascinated with it, but I'm curious, to hear about your kind of journey into all this.
Sure. Well, what was that? What was the timeline? What were the years of that arc?
This was 2016. So it was like during the Trump-Hillary election cycle.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, my China arc was 2017 to 2020. And I think I was living in Beijing, which is a different experience for a number of reasons than Shanghai. But I also came to China wanting to work in tech. I guess I came to China and then very quickly it was clear to me that the only interesting jobs were ultimately going to be not in Western firms trying to enter China, but this was the hot minute where Chinese firms were trying to expand around the world, and that wasn't quite as sensitive as it ended up turning out to be. So working at places like ByteDance and the company that turned out to make Temu, all were the sort of interesting jobs for foreigners, because you were totally right. Like the alpha of being a foreigner doing business in China is like a 1980s, 1990s, first half of the 2000s story. And then sort of your only alpha as a foreigner in China was not even working at Microsoft China or what have you, but helping the Chinese firms explore the rest of the world. So I moved there in 2017 for graduate school. Very quickly was all right, if I'm going to stay here, it's going to be working for a Chinese firm because there's no other interesting jobs. I did that for I guess 9 months, I think. I was at Kuaishou, which was actually the first company to do short video and got completely blown out of the water by ByteDance. But within 2 months of being there, I was like, oh, this is really silly. They're asking me to expand into Turkey, and I don't speak Turkish. And doing my podcast and newsletter when I was at work was more fun. So I kind of rode that until they realized that and fired me. And then COVID happened and I left. So anyways, I mean, no, good time. Don't regret it. But yeah, the sort of the time where there was any edge in being a Western business trying to expand into China, I think closed before your or ours time.
Well, I want to go through some of the big topics that you've covered recently. Maybe we should start with just the foundation model battle that's going on. Can you give us a lay of the land over in China? What's happening on the LLM front?
All right, I got a take for you that I'm parroting from Alvin Wong, who gave it to me today at breakfast. America created DeepSeek.
Oh,
whoa.
So there is this window in around 2017 or 2018 where the calculus of the top students in China about where they want to go to undergrad and where they want to do, masters and PhDs changes. And part of it is a function of opportunities in China where wages are increasing. There's this big, exciting startup ecosystem, but there's also a big part of it of the Trump administration and just like, the vibes being bad, and that the vibes being bad for Asian Americans, whether that's like realized by the numbers or just amplified by Chinese propaganda. And then COVID, where China was doing fine over the course of 2020, and America wasn't. So the sort of choice, and it was also very difficult to go back and forth between the two countries, which, if you're going to be deciding to like go and live halfway across the world, like you might want to see your parents every once in a while, which was not a straightforward thing during the lockdown years. So what used to happen pre-2016-17 is the best Chinese students would go to the tier 1 universities in the US. The sort of next rung down would go to the tier 2 universities in the US. And then the third rung down would go to the best universities in China. And that was kind of a clear hierarchy. But once you had these three factors of China's economic earnings potential in China expanding, like bad vibes for Asians in America, and COVID, a lot more of those sort of top folks who would have ended up wanting to go to, MIT or Stanford just stayed in China. And the core of DeepSeek's engineering base are all under 30 and all from those top Chinese universities in that cohort. So we really messed up our shot to do this whole brain drain thing. Or we had a great thing going for like 40 years of really getting the best Chinese talent to come to America, get their education here. And by the way, like 85% of the folks who end up getting PhDs in STEM in the US, like either try to stay or end up staying. But by sort of screwing that up, we've really undercut ourselves, I think, for the long term.
Yeah, that's a good trend.
What's your take now on the true cost of DeepSeek? Because they came out with this like clearly a number that was just shockingly low, and it felt like it was designed to shock the market, and then more truth sort of came out over time, but it's less, it's less impactful when it sort of dripped out and saying, well, we did have these chips, and well, we didn't count our R&D costs. It was just just seems like, to me, it's now unclear, but clearly was more expensive. Do you have a good have you sort of tried to triangulate it?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, it's not dirt cheap, but they also don't have as many chips as Anthropic or OpenAI or Google. So, there's some sort of triangulation that you can do. I point you guys to Nathan Lambert, who kind of did the back of the envelope math. He came up to like $300 million a year, like annual run rate for DeepSeek, something like that, right? I mean, it's a very successful quantitative hedge fund. They have money to burn, but they are also not Google, right?
Yeah.
But I do think this sort of interesting angle or story from this is that there is an aspect of not necessarily like constraints breeding creativity. Well, there's a part of that, but also the sort of constraints lead you down different technological trees. And which is not to say that like the US or Western labs can't like explore the more the things where you're not necessarily pushing capabilities, but pushing efficiency, which I'm sure they are as they kind of reach the limits of like, oh man, like I guess we're going to have to do $100 billion run to make our model better. But I think DeepSeek kind of came to that earlier, the sort of need to really push on kind of the efficiency frontier as opposed to the capability frontier, because they ran out of chips before the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic.
On going off of that, when you're trying to understand something related to China, how many different sort of data sources do you need to basically triangulate? Because my experience living in China, people were willing to just basically say nonsense or lies to sort of further one of their ambitions. And so like I came away from that experience being like, not having it wasn't a very like high trust dynamic between me and anything coming out of sort of specifically like national security, sort of like critical issues. I just
State
sort of
media.
like state media, anything along those lines.
What's the algorithm for finding the
yeah,
truth?
what's your truth algorithm?
What's the algorithm for finding truth in Silicon Valley? I mean, it's besides,
I was about to say,
besides watch this show, right?
Yeah, there's a ton of hype in Western.
No, and obviously every company comes out and saying we're replacing $5 trillion of labor with our AI agents, and we're doing this and we're doing that. But I do think it's.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in this. There are sort of different heuristics you can apply to different to different fields, right? So for instance, Jeffrey Goldberg, the equivalent of the Chinese Jeffrey Goldberg, if they were added to the, war planning group WeChat group, would not have published that, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Sure.
I think, the closer you get to kind of like, national security adjacent questions, the more, you're dealing with an authoritarian state who has complete control of media. And like, there's a whole kind of ecosystem of people who try to like read through the lines of state media and, PLA journals to try to understand what this stuff means. I think for the sort of more commercial tech focused stuff, these are mostly private sector firms trying to play games and raise their next round, right?
Yeah.
I think the one difference is that there is more money that flows directly from firms to journalists in China. So the sort of discount factor that you have to apply to Chinese technology coverage, specifically positive technology coverage, or even negative technology coverage, because sometimes that's like seeded by the enemy company or whatever, tends to be higher. So it's fine, and you get to know the journalists, and you get to know which outlets are more or less credible. But that I think is the main difference here.
Can you talk a little bit about humanoid robots? I keep seeing these incredible videos of Unitree robots. There's a lot of skepticism around the American robotics companies being maybe behind or maybe teleoperating a lot. Like, what's your take right now on humanoid robotics?
Yeah, specifically, does the U.S. need to pay more attention to Unitree running this sort of DGI playbook with humanoids?
I mean, I don't know about humanoids, man. I mean, like it is. I think it is obvious. It is pretty. Like we did 2 features on the Chinese humanoid robotics industry and then Chinese industrial robotics industry, and I think the big markets in the 3-year horizon, let's say, are much more on the industrial robotics side. But in general, like we don't build robots here. And so from a I think any sort of like large scale manufacturing thing, whether it's Unitree or another, or industrial robots or cars or what have you, like China has a really remarkable advantage in scale and manufacturing scale. And the US, like, it's not just the cost of labor, it's the experience, it's the network, and it's the kind of like 25 years of learning that all these firms have been doing to get to the place where they can, manufacture a drone 15 times cheaper than the US can. So, I think it's real. I don't really know how to solve it. I mean, you're friends with all the Gundo bros. Like, ask them for the for what they need to build 1 billion of these. But I'm
a tough challenge.
What's your take on the news out of Ant talking about how they've had some training model breakthroughs through like leveraging what they're saying is entirely Chinese chips? Do you have a good read on that situation yet? Is it important, or is it just another headline?
I don't really buy it. yet. I think there's a really interesting wrinkle in the sort of Chinese domestic chip manufacturing arc. So just to back up for all the viewers out there, America in October of 2020, or by the Biden administration in October of 2022, had this big export control push where they were just like, we're going to do everything on our power to, we're going to start trying to restrict the China's ability to import semiconductor manufacturing equipment so that they would not be able to make frontier AI chips to train the next generation of models. And kind of ever since, Huawei, the China's leading chip designer, and SMIC, the kind of analog to TSMC, have been trying to push back against that, fight through loopholes and make the sort of level of chips and the quantity of sort of the quantity and quality of chips that NVIDIA is able to do at TSMC. So it is a big open question whether or not they'll get there. I think the jury is very much still out. I would be kind of wary of headlines because the sort of most important, there are two important facts to understand looking at this over the next 3 years. First, Huawei was able to manufacture an enormous amount of chips at TSMC by basically creating a shell company. TSMC, deciding to look the other way about some Chinese firm manufacturing all these AI chips, and then the U.S. government catching them and be like, "What the fuck? You can't do this anymore." So they have an enormous amount of supply. And so any sort of we train this on only Chinese AI chips is not actually like SMIC chips. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, off-brand TSMC chips. So the big challenge is going to be whether SMIC can do kind of competitive chips at scale domestically. And the challenge there is they are not allowed and have not yet been able to replace EUV tools, which is what ASML makes. And you can't really sneak it in. It's incredibly difficult to sort of re-engineer. And that's really the final frontier for the Chinese domestication. And despite a handful of headlines, I think that over the past week, I think that is much more smoke than fire.
So, I mean, they do have a competitor to ASML in SME, correct? And then they also need to rebuild SK Hynix at some point, I imagine, for the memory and the flash, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were also able to stockpile an enormous amount of memory. It was so awkward because there was literally a Reuters article in like the summer of 2024, like BIS is planning to crack down on memory, and then they did it a little bit, but like wrong in October, and then they finally didn't fix it until like a week before the Trump administration came in. So just fuck ups all around. Oof. And at some point, but there's a whole lot of memory sitting in warehouses in China that they'll be good through for at least the next 2 years.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to massively generalize here, and then you can try to piece it apart and figure out if there's any meaning here. But China had, decades to sort of embed Chinese, either former or current Chinese nationals in U.S. companies, which then were able to over time bring back sort of important information, IP in different ways to sort of like catch up on, advanced, basically catch up on developing their own versions of products from everything from like the F-35 to phones and things like that, right? Now we're in a position where like China is much more advanced in sort of manufacturing, robotics, some of these things that you were saying, and we don't have the same benefit of being able to send a bunch of Americans over there for decades to sort of then like help us re-engineer that. What's the U.S.'s like actually viable strategy to kind of like catch up again? China's caught up on product development. Can we catch back up on advanced manufacturing and what would be, is it possible, right?
I gotcha. Yeah. So the thing that I always used to hold my hat on was America attracts the best scientists and funds the most science in the world. And that is a thing that may just stop happening because the Trump administration doesn't care about the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, wants to blow up universities for better or for worse from their perspective. But like, this is the thing that won us the Cold War, is getting the best immigrants and having them like do crazy STEM stuff. And so, yeah, I am worried about this because that was kind of my ace in the hole, is like, yes, there will be this sort of like technology flow or sort of like human talent flow back and forth between the US and China. I think it's kind of like inhuman almost to cut that off. But the sort of hope and expectation is that like America is just a better place to live and folks will want to stay here, and more like America will gain more from that exchange in the long run, just like what I was talking about in the sort of DeepSeek context. And when you look at a lot of the founders of these AI firms, a lot of sort of the top research engineers, like an enormous amount, I would say over 75% of them were not born in the US. So that is like our real superpower here, is this being a country that is attractive to and like to a certain extent welcomes the world's best talent, and kind of giving that away, it just makes it a lot more difficult because you do need to run faster on all of these different dimensions. And the way you do that, I mean, I buy into this sort of Silicon Valley mindset that there are such things as 10x engineers, and you want to be able to like capture as much of them and the extraordinary founders or whatever. And sort of losing out on that is going to make it a whole lot more tricky.
Last question.
Peter Zeihan, very popular in tech. He likes to talk about how China's population is in free fall, and the Chinese state as we know it is unsustainable. Peter Zeihan's one of those guys. The criticism is that when you hear him talk about something you know nothing about, you're like, this guy knows everything. He's like completely brilliant. And then when you hear him talk about something you actually know about, you're like, what is this guy talking about? I'm sure when you listen to Zeihan talk about China, you have some thoughts, but talk about, he basically is writing them off. He's saying, yes, they're a force, but he's sort of like writing them off long-term in many ways due to the demographic issues. Do you have any comments on that?
What's that Mad Men line? I don't think about you at all.
Cool.
I mean, like, I think in general, sort of there are nuances to everything I've said here, which I have, kind of tuned up for our new generation of sports call and radio. I think there are demographic challenges. China is not 10,000 feet tall. There are definitely things that it has been really overperforming on, and some of the trend lines, some of the trend lines I think are very worrisome to Washington. Other trend lines are very worrisome if you're running China. And kind of understanding the nuances of that, and also baking in like different potential futures of like things that America could screw up, things that China could screw up, things that America could screw up, not relation indirectly to China, but relation to the way it deals with the rest of the world, are all, I guess I got to make the plug now, the sorts of things that we explore on ChinaTalk, our podcast.
We love plugs here. Thanks for coming on.
Anyways, for more on that, that's, I guarantee you, more thoughtful and engaging than Peter Zeihan. Please search ChinaTalk, one word, and your favorite podcast.
ChinaTalk.media is the website. Go subscribe, add it to your podcast player. The Substack.
You are now our official Eastern correspondent.
We'd love to have you back on. I have like 25 more questions. Energy. We could go through chips more. There's so much we could do. We'd love to have you back. Thanks so much for coming on. This is fantastic.
Talk soon, guys.
Thanks for coming on. Cheers.
Bye.